Inside an industrial workshop, wooden planks are stacked into a tall, uneven pile. Then, without warning, the entire structure tips and collapses all at once. Inside a factory floor, an automated molding machine sits mid-cycle. Then, without warning, the system restarts and motion resumes inside the operating zone. On a factory loading platform, a suspended bundle hangs in place when the lifting hook suddenly drops and swings through the surrounding space. Inside a metal fabrication workshop, an operator works on a powered metal processing machine. Suddenly, the machine activates unexpectedly, and the rotating mechanism surges to life. On a factory floor packed with conveyors and robotic arms, a boundary is crossed into an active movement line. Yet the system continues without interruption. On a warehouse floor near a vertical lifting system, the upper section is raised. Then, without warning, it suddenly drops. On a narrow dock walkway beside a vessel, a mooring line suddenly tightens, and the space turns into a snapback zone in an instant. In a busy container yard, a large reach stacker swings wide while turning, its rear counterweight sweeping outward faster than the machine's visible path suggests. Train station platform, a long cleaning pole is raised upward, reaching into the energized zone of the overhead line above. At a busy city intersection, road workers kneel beside an open manhole performing maintenance when a sudden burst of pressurized gas erupts from the opening and ignites. On an open roadway, two workers focus on smoothing freshly poured material, while traffic continues moving just feet away. Within seconds, a moving vehicle drifts into the edge of the work zone, turning a routine task into an immediate roadside hazard. On a construction site, a mobile crane lifts a long concrete column. Then the entire truck suddenly tilts as the load pulls it off balance. Inside a busy tire workshop, multiple large off-road tires are laid out across the floor. When one pressurized tire suddenly releases its stored energy in a rapid outward burst. Follow controlled tire servicing procedures. Use inflation cages, remote airlines, and maintain a safe standoff distance. Never position yourself directly over or beside a pressurized tire during handling heavy equipment. Tires operate under high internal pressure and act like compressed energy vessels. If the bead is not properly seated, the rim is misaligned, or structural integrity is compromised, the stored energy can release instantly, producing a rapid pressure release and outward expansion that displaces anything nearby. A tire isn't just rubber, it's compressed energy waiting to release. Control the process, keep your distance, and respect the pressure every time. Roadside collection stop, a worker tosses a bag into a garbage truck. Then, in an instant, the compactor zone reacts as internal pressure builds unexpectedly. Never assume waste is safe to compress. Do not load sealed or unknown contents into compaction equipment without inspection. Garbage trucks use hydraulic compactors that generate extremely high compressive force to reduce waste volume. When a sealed or pressurized item is introduced, the compaction process increases internal pressure beyond the container's limits. This rapid pressure rise can cause the container to fail suddenly, releasing stored energy as expanding gas or material displacement. Compression multiplies hidden risks. Unknown waste should never be forced under pressure. Inside a factory line of heavy stamping presses, a worker carries out his duties in the machine's working zone, right where the metal and force meet, just as the equipment cycles again. Do not enter or reach into the operating zone of a powered press unless the machine is fully isolated, locked out, and verified safe, because these systems can cycle automatically or unexpectedly, leaving no time to react or withdraw. Industrial presses convert stored mechanical or hydraulic energy into extremely high force, delivered in a fixed vertical path. Their cycle time is fast and repeatable, meaning once triggered by automation, sensors, or residual energy, the ram will complete its full stroke regardless of obstructions. Because the motion is guided and constrained, there is no deviation or slowdown, and anything within that path is subjected to the full force instantly. Machines don't hesitate. Control the energy before you get close. On a residential terrace in Subhash Nagar, a man tosses debris over the edge during cleaning. entering the space of a nearby low-tension power line running close to the wall. Maintain safe clearance from all electrical lines around buildings and treat every exposed wire as energized. Avoid working, reaching, or disposing materials near live lines. Low-tension, LT lines still carry enough voltage to energize objects and surfaces upon contact. When a tool or thrown material enters this energized zone, electricity can travel instantly through the nearest conductive path, especially in outdoor environments where moisture and debris increase conductivity. Danger doesn't always look like high voltage. It can be right next to you. If a line is within reach, it's already a hazard. From a second-floor corridor, a bulky object is dropped without warning. Seconds later, it impacts the walkway below. Never, ever dispose of or move heavy objects from height without controlled. Lowering methods and a secured exclusion zone below. Gravity turns any falling object into a high-energy hazard, and even everyday items become dangerous when dropped from elevation. Proper procedures require using lifting equipment, ropes, or staged handoffs, while ensuring the ground area is clearly barricaded and monitored to prevent anyone from entering the drop zone. When an object falls, gravitational potential energy converts into kinetic energy, increasing with both height and mass. As it accelerates downward, its momentum grows, and upon impact, that energy is transferred instantly to whatever is below. The higher the drop, the greater the velocity and force at impact, leaving no time for reaction or avoidance. Height multiplies danger in silence. If it can fall, it must be controlled. In a wet car wash bay, one misplaced step turns an ordinary walk across the floor into a sudden fall hazard. An open service pit on a wet floor is a live fall zone. Never, ever run or walk casually along its edge during wash operations. Use pit covers or guardrails, and only approach with deliberate footing and clear visibility. In a quiet courtyard, large cauldrons simmer over open heat as the tomato paste cooks. Then the ground beneath suddenly ruptures, releasing built-up pressure and forcing the entire setup upward in an uncontrolled surge. Heat buildup beneath enclosed or unstable ground surfaces can generate pressure that releases without warning, especially when fire, moisture, and confined space interact. Maintain stable footing, controlled heat zones, and awareness of what's happening below the surface, not just above it. As heat from the fire transfers into the ground, any trapped moisture beneath the surface begins to convert into steam. Steam expands rapidly, up to 1,700 times the volume of water, creating intense pressure in confined spaces. If the surface above cannot vent or withstand that pressure, it fractures violently, releasing energy upward and displacing anything resting on it, including heavy cooking equipment. The danger isn't always in what you see, it's often beneath your feet. Stable ground and controlled heat zones are what keep routine work from turning explosive. The back of a pickup, equipment is accessed beneath an overhead metal arm. Then, without warning, the arm swings loose and drops rapidly into the working zone. Unsecured suspended components can shift without warning, turning overhead zones into immediate strike hazards when gravity takes control. Inside a busy supermarket, customers and staff move through checkout as towering shelves stand fully loaded. Then, deep in the aisle, the structure gives way and the entire section begins to collapse. Manage storage loads with proper weight distribution, structural limits, and routine inspection of racking systems. Overloaded or unevenly, loaded shelves place excessive stress on support frames, especially at height. Ensure weight ratings are respected, heavy items are stored on lower levels, and racks are secured and aligned to prevent progressive failure across connected sections. Racking systems distribute weight vertically through frames and beams, but excessive or uneven loading shifts stress beyond design limits. When one section fails, it transfers load to adjacent supports, creating a chain reaction. This cascading effect causes multiple levels to collapse in sequence as structural integrity is lost. When one point fails, everything follows. Respect load limits or trigger the collapse. On a fragile rooftop, a partially cut tree shifts under its own weight. One imbalance, and the entire trunk begins to give way. Tree cutting near structures must be planned with controlled cutting techniques, stable positioning, and exclusion zones. Workers should never stand on unstable roofs or directly under or beside a partially cut trunk, and the fall direction must be predetermined using proper notch cuts, guide ropes, and clear communication between all involved. When a tree is partially cut, its structural fibers begin to fail unevenly, shifting the center of gravity away from its original vertical axis. As the cut deepens, gravity creates a rotational moment, torque, around the remaining uncut fibers, while internal pressure builds until those fibers suddenly release. A falling tree follows physics, not intention. Anything within its path becomes part of that motion. On a quiet roadside at night, a dump truck sits idle while two people rest beside it. Then, without warning, the vehicle begins to move, while a blind spot remains occupied within the surrounding zone. Do not move any vehicle without confirming the surrounding area is completely clear. Before engaging a truck, operators must perform a full 360-degree check around and beneath the vehicle, because blind spots and assumptions about others' positions can instantly turn a stationary environment into a high-risk situation. Sliding heavy metal gate moves along its track. Then the overhead rail suddenly drops out of place. Sliding gates with overhead guide rails depend on secure mounting and alignment to keep the structure stable during movement. If the top rail or guide loosens, wears out, or detaches, the gate can lose lateral stability instantly. Operators must avoid standing close to or beneath the gate while moving it, and regular inspection of brackets, fasteners, and guide tracks is critical. The top rail acts as a stabilizer, preventing the gate from tipping or shifting sideways while it moves along the bottom track. When that rail fails, the gate's center of mass is no longer constrained, allowing gravity and lateral forces to push it off balance. Even a slight tilt creates torque around the lower contact point, causing the structure to lean or collapse rapidly as the load shifts beyond its base of support. Stability often depends on what you don't notice. When a guide fails, balance disappears in an instant. In a warehouse aisle packed with shelves and loose boxes, loaded carts move through tight space, while an open elevator shaft sits exposed behind the path of travel. Enforce strict control of all floor openings by installing physical barriers, locked gates, or secured covers before any work begins in the area. Workers must maintain constant positional awareness when moving loads, especially when walking backward, and workflows should be designed to eliminate blind movement wherever hazards like shafts, pits, or drop-offs exist. Human balance depends heavily on forward visual input and spatial awareness. When moving backward, the brain loses real-time depth cues and hazard detection. Once the trailing foot crosses an unsupported edge, the body's center of mass shifts beyond the base of support, triggering an immediate loss of equilibrium. With no solid surface to counteract gravity, unsupported mass accelerates downward, leaving no time for corrective movement or recovery. What you can't see can still control your path. Secure the opening before anyone moves near it. Steel coil hangs from a forklift in an open yard. Then, without warning, the load loses support and drops free from the forks. Never, ever use a forklift as a crane for suspended loads. Forklifts are not designed to safely control hanging weight, and doing so removes stability, precision, and load security, turning even a routine lift into an unpredictable swinging hazard that can shift, drop, or rotate without control. On a narrow rail path above a drop, a man bends down to lift a loose metal rail right at the edge of a broken concrete span. Then the unstable surface shifts under applied force. Never, ever work on unstable or unsupported edges without securing the ground and establishing a safe standing position. If the ground isn't stable, neither are you. Secure the surface before you apply force. On a roadside transport, a large elevated load sits beneath overhead power lines, where even a small change in clearance turns the space into an electrical hazard zone. Do not touch or reach toward live electrical lines. Always maintain safe distance and treat them as energized. Inside a toll booth, everything looks routine, until a sudden roadway failure sends high force toward the enclosure, pushing energy through the glass in an instant. Don't always assume that enclosed spaces like booths or cabins are fully protected. Always recognize exposure to external hazards, especially high-energy failures like tire bursts, and ensure barriers, positioning, and protective materials are designed to withstand sudden impact forces. At a rail handling platform, a worker pulls on long steel rails stacked over a gap. Then a small shift in position removes support and the surface gives way without warning. Never, ever pull or handle heavy materials while standing on unstable surfaces or over open gaps. Secure your footing first. Inside a canal, an excavator operates near the edge. Then the bucket suddenly releases and drops downward within the machine's working range. Maintain the excavator exclusion zone and never walk under a raised bucket. Treat the machine's operating envelope as active whenever the boom is elevated. In a tight roadside lane, a parked container creates a narrow space just as a truck begins reversing into the blind zone behind it. Do not use phones or distractions near moving vehicles. Stay alert and maintain clear awareness in active traffic zones. Inside a pizzeria kitchen, a pressure cooker sits sealed and heated. Seconds later, built-up pressure suddenly releases into the surrounding air. Do not operate pressure cookers without strict control of pressure release systems. When steam and internal pressure are not properly managed, energy builds rapidly inside the vessel, and any failure or premature opening can trigger a sudden, forceful release of contents and pressure. On a quiet roadside at night, a large tire suddenly releases its built-up pressure in a violent burst of air and debris. Always treat large tires, especially truck or heavy equipment tires, as pressurized hazards. Use proper inflation procedures and keep a safe distance during servicing. Inside a construction site, an excavator is lifted out of a deep pit suspended mid-air when the load begins to shift off balance. Ensure lifting plans account for load stability, secure rigging, and controlled balance before hoisting heavy equipment over voids. In a tight loading yard between two parked cargo trucks, a worker leans his full body weight against the front of a heavy vehicle, trying to push against it, but it doesn't respond the way he expects. Do not rely on body force to control or stop large vehicles. Always assume heavy trucks can move suddenly or shift without warning, and maintain a sub-buffer zone instead of placing yourself directly between solid surfaces where escape space is limited. Inside a cluttered workshop, a large wooden piece spins on a lathe. When it suddenly comes loose and moves outward from the rotation, secure workpieces properly and always stand out of the direct line of rotation when operating a lathe. In a narrow construction yard, a truck reverses along a boundary wall while a worker stands just beside it when the available space suddenly begins to close. Maintain safe clearance from reversing vehicles and never stand between a moving vehicle and a fixed structure. Always stay visible and outside compression zones. When a heavy vehicle reverses in confined space, even slight lateral movement can transfer force into nearby structures. If the structure is weakened or unstable, the impact can displace it, collapsing it into the adjacent space while the vehicle continues its motion. Moving mass and fixed structures create invisible danger zones. If space is closing, you need to be moving away, not standing still. At a roadside service area in Lipetsk, a worker leans over a large truck tire while adjusting it, when it suddenly releases built-up pressure in a rapid burst of air and debris. Treat all heavy-duty tires as high-energy pressure systems. Use protective positioning, proper tools, and safety cages when servicing or inflating. Along a narrow path lined with palm trees, a man walks forward carrying a long metal rod raised high, entering the energized zone of overhead power lines. Maintain safe clearance from overhead electrical lines and control the height and orientation of conductive materials during transport. Overhead power lines carry high voltage that can energize nearby conductive objects through direct contact or electrical arcing. When a long metal rod enters this energized zone, it becomes a pathway for current, allowing electricity to travel instantly along its length and into whatever is in contact with it. Height and reach can turn tools into hazards. If it can touch the line, it can carry the danger. Outside a residential building, a worker applies plaster high on the wall near an exposed edge when the supporting surface suddenly gives way. Use stable platforms, proper scaffolding, and fall protection when working at height. Never rely on unstable footing or improvised support. On an open industrial roadside, a forklift moves along the edge of the lane and begins a turn. Then the machine tips and rolls as its balance shifts beyond the stability limit. Operate forklifts with strict attention to speed, turning radius, surface conditions, and load position. Keep the center of gravity low, stay within the machine's stability triangle, and use the seat restraint so the operator remains protected inside the safety zone. On a construction site beside active power lines, a boom lift rises higher and higher until the space between the metal and wire suddenly turns into a path for energy. Do not operate elevated equipment near overhead power lines. Always maintain minimum clearance distances and treat every line as energized to prevent unintended electrical contact or arc. In a busy container yard, a heavy reach stacker begins to move between stacked containers, while a forward blind zone conceals a critical obstruction within its path. Do not enter or remain in. Equipment blind spots. Always establish clear exclusion zones and confirm visibility or communication before any heavy vehicle moves. Large container handling equipment like reach stackers have extensive forward blind zones due to their elevated cab, long chassis, and load handling structure. Objects or close to the front can fall completely outside the operator's line of sight, especially at ground level. When the machine begins to move, its mass and momentum create a continuous forward force, and without visual feedback or detection systems, the operator has no immediate input to stop or adjust. The size and weight of the equipment means stopping distance is not instantaneous, especially at low visibility angles. If the operator can't detect it, it's outside the machine's awareness. Maintain separation and stay within visible zones at all times. On a clear airport apron, a parked aircraft sits still with safety markings on the ground. Yet a service vehicle drives straight into the wing's silent boundary. Do not enter marked aircraft safety zones. Always stop. Assess clearance, and follow ground markings before moving equipment near parked aircraft. A loaded truck rolls onto a narrow river barge. Then the entire platform begins to tilt under shifting weight. Never drive heavy vehicles onto a floating platform without confirming load distribution and stability limits. A water pump hums on a wet concrete floor. Then one small contact turns the entire setup into an energized electrical zone. Never use electrical equipment on wet surfaces without proper insulation, grounding, and protection. Water significantly reduces electrical resistance, allowing current to travel easily across surfaces and through conductive paths. When exposed wiring or equipment interacts with moisture, electricity can escape its intended circuit and energize nearby surfaces, creating an unintended path to ground. Electricity always follows the easiest path. Wet environments make everything part of the circuit. A suspended load hangs over a snowy work zone. Then the rigging suddenly fails, sending the load accelerating downward and outward along its path. Never stand within the fall or swing zone of a suspended load, and always wear proper head protection. Inside a textile facility, a worker steps onto the edge of a running machine to adjust material when the rotating rollers suddenly draw everything inward toward the pinch point. Keep clear of moving rollers and conveyors during operation. Isolate and lock out machinery before attempting adjustments or interventions. Textile machines use rotating rollers and feed systems that create continuous pinch points. These rollers generate strong pulling forces designed to draw fabric through and anything entering that zone. Loose material, fabric, or any item entering that zone can be rapidly pulled in due to friction and rotational momentum. If it's moving, it's pulling. Shut it down before you reach in. On an offshore rig floor, heavy equipment operates beneath suspended loads. When a component suddenly drops into the work zone, always secure overhead loads, verify rigging integrity, and establish exclusion zones beneath suspended equipment. No one should stand under a lifted load. Suspended loads rely entirely on rigging systems, chains, slings, hooks, and connection points to remain stable. If any component fails or becomes improperly secured, gravity takes immediate control, accelerating the load downward with increasing force, leaving no time for reaction. What's above you matters as much as what's around you. If it's not secured, it's already a falling hazard. Inside an industrial workshop, a pressurized machine assembly runs through connected piping. when the system suddenly releases its built-up pressure in a rapid burst. Do not stand on or over pressurized systems during operation. Isolate, depressurize, and verify zero energy before approaching or working on equipment. At a dimly lit construction site, a narrow galvanized steel surface sits beside an open wastewater pit when the edge suddenly gives way under load. Never step onto unsecured, narrow, or potentially slippery metal surfaces near open pits. Always use designated walkways, guardrails, and fall protection when working at elevation or around openings. In a cluttered industrial yard, a worker stands elevated on a metal drum while cutting overhead. Sparks fall onto a sealed metal drum beneath overhead cutting, while unstable pressure builds inside. Never stand on containers or drums as work platforms, especially when performing hot work above them. Always verify contents, ensure proper venting, and use approved stable access equipment. Residual vapors inside enclosed drums can form highly combustible mixtures. Even a small spark introduces enough energy to trigger rapid combustion and pressure buildup. The confined space amplifies this reaction, causing a sudden rupture or explosion. A drum is never empty until proven safe and ventilated. Elevate safely. Never gamble with hidden pressure below your feet. Beside a parked pickup, a man stands on a small stool to load long timbers, when a subtle shift causes the support to suddenly give way. Never use makeshift supports like stools or unstable objects for elevated work. Always use proper ladders or secured platforms designed to handle load and balance. Outside a motorcycle service bay, roadside traffic moves past the work zone when a fast-moving bike suddenly loses control and slides sideways into the area. Do maintain safe positioning away from roadside activity zones and avoid working directly exposed to passing traffic without barriers. At speed, a motorcycle's balance depends on traction and steering stability. Once that is lost, inertia carries both the machine forward uncontrollably. The collision redirects that momentum laterally, projecting everything into nearby surroundings. Road hazards don't stop at the road. Create distance or risk entering the hazard zone. Inside a busy auto workshop, a car sits lifted while a worker operates tools beneath. Unseen heat and sparks begin building inside the vehicle, quietly turning the space into a hazard zone. Do continuously monitor for heat, sparks, and ignition risks when working near enclosed vehicle interiors, especially during cutting or welding tasks. At a roadside fuel station, a small vehicle is being refueled when fuel vapors suddenly ignite at the pump area, rapidly spreading across the space. Do strictly control all ignition sources, eliminate static buildup, and maintain a clear exclusion zone around fueling operations. Proper grounding, safe handling procedures, and limiting unnecessary personnel near fuel transfer points are critical to prevent vapor ignition in confined or open environments. Fuel vapors evaporate rapidly and disperse into the surrounding air, forming a highly flammable mixture within a specific concentration range. These vapors are often invisible and can travel beyond the immediate fueling point. When a spark, whether from static electricity, metal contact, or equipment, is introduced, it ignites the vapor cloud instantly, causing rapid combustion and pressure expansion that propagates outward in a flash event. The danger isn't the liquid, it's the invisible vapor. Control the environment before it ignites. On an active roadway, a marked work zone sits within flowing traffic when a fast-moving vehicle fails to slow and enters the zone at speed. Establish layered traffic control systems, including advanced warning signs, speed reduction measures, physical buffers, and designated safe zones to separate workers from moving vehicles. Workers should never rely solely on driver compliance and must always position themselves with an escape path and maximum visibility. On a construction site, a worker climbs onto a tractor arm to move a hanging cable. Then sudden sparks erupt as the metal makes contact. Treat all overhead lines as live at all times. Maintain minimum approach distances and use only insulated tools and approved methods for repositioning or working near electrical conductors. Equipment should never be used as a contact point for unknown or energized lines. Electrical systems maintain high voltage potential, and when a conductive object like machinery enters that field, it provides a low resistance path for current flow. Once contact or close proximity occurs, electricity can arc through the air, ionizing it and creating a conductive bridge. This results in a rapid discharge of energy through the equipment structure, producing intense heat, light, and explosive sparks. You don't have to touch electricity to trigger it. Distance is the first line of defense. A long bamboo stick extends upward near a home entrance. Then it reaches too close to overhead lines, turning a simple task into a hidden electrical hazard. Never lift long objects, conductive or not, near overhead power lines. Always maintain safe clearance. Even though bamboo is normally less conductive, moisture, dirt, and internal water content can significantly lower its resistance. When brought close to high-voltage lines, the electric field can cause current to bridge the gap or travel along the surface of the bamboo, especially if it's damp, creating a continuous path toward ground. Non-conductive doesn't mean safe near power lines. Distance, not material, is what protects you. On a rural roadside, a bulldozer moves down from a trailer ramp. Then, as its weight shifts, the entire setup loses balance. Never, ever attempt to unload heavy tracked equipment from a trailer that is not fully stabilized, level, and supported on solid ground. Do not rely on visual balance alone. Verify ground-bearing capacity, secure the trailer against movement, and ensure ramps are properly aligned and rated for the full machine load. Inside a workshop, a worker straddles a stepladder to reach the back of a van, until a small shift in balance turns the ladder into a tipping point. Never, ever straddle a ladder or work outside its side rails to gain extra reach. Do keep your body centered between the rails and reposition the ladder instead of overreaching. Stability depends on alignment, not convenience. Inside a narrow hallway, a worker reaches toward an exposed electrical connection. Then, in an instant, the air ionizes and a high-energy arc forms across the gap. Desist from touching or manipulating exposed wiring or connections without isolating the power source first. Do de-energize circuits and verify zero voltage before any contact. Electricity doesn't give second chances. On a smoke-filled second floor, a ladder becomes the only exit for two firefighters. Then, in a single moment, its stability fails under load. Never, ever trust a ladder placement that hasn't been secured and angle-checked under load. Do ensure ladders are properly footed, tied off, and positioned at a safe angle before committing your full weight, especially during emergency egress. On a roadside shoulder, a forklift tries to place a car into a truck bed. Then the entire lift becomes unstable in seconds and starts tipping before the placement is complete. Always use equipment specifically designed for vehicle lifting and loading, with proper attachment points and load control. Don't lift oversized or unbalanced loads on standard forks, especially at height or extended reach. Inside a small shop counter area, a lighter is being lit in a confined space. Then, in an instant, accumulated vapors ignite and release energy through the air. Do keep ignition sources away from enclosed spaces where vapors, gases, or flammable residues may be present. Don't use open flames near counters, storage areas, or confined indoor environments without confirming the air is clear of flammable buildup. Lighters release a small but concentrated fuel source, typically butane, which can accumulate in low or poorly ventilated areas because it is heavier than air. When this vapor mixes with oxygen within a certain concentration range, it forms a flammable mixture that can ignite instantly when exposed to a spark. The ignition causes rapid combustion, expanding gases and producing a brief but intense pressure and heat wave in the immediate area. Invisible vapors can ignite faster than you react. If the air isn't clear, a single spark is enough. Inside a deep excavation trench, a cutting torch meets an old pipeline. Then, in an instant, trapped gases ignite and release energy upward from the ground. Treat all pipelines as potentially pressurized or containing flammable residues before any cutting or grinding begins. Don't introduce sparks, heat, or open flame until the line is fully isolated, purged, and verified gas-free. The street food stall looks normal until a single point of contact turns the entire metal setup into an energized hazard. Do keep electrical wiring sealed grounded, and protected, especially around metal surfaces and wet areas. Don't operate equipment with exposed wires or unstable power connections in environments where water and metal are present. Electricity always tries to travel through the easiest path to the ground. If wiring is damaged or poorly connected, power can leak out and spread into nearby metal objects like tables, frames, or equipment. Instead of staying inside the wires, the energy moves into anything conductive. In environments with water, metal surfaces, and damp ground, electricity can spread beyond its intended path. When conductive surfaces become energized, current follows available paths to ground through connected materials. Electricity follows the easiest path. Make sure that path is never through your workspace. A delivery van rolls forward quietly while someone stands just feet away from it. Always stay alert and maintain distance when vehicles are running or positioned on slopes or driveways. Don't assume you can stop a moving vehicle with body strength. At a bridge removal site, an excavator extends its arm over unstable ground. Then the entire surface suddenly gives way. Ensure to assess ground stability and load-bearing capacity before positioning. Heavy equipment near edges. Don't operate machinery on unsupported or eroded soil without proper reinforcement. Excavators exert significant ground pressure through their tracks, especially when the arm extends outward. This shifts the machine's center of gravity forward, concentrating force at the edge. If the soil or structure beneath cannot support that load, it begins to fail. Near water, soil is often weakened by saturation and erosion. The ground may appear solid on the surface but lacks internal cohesion. Edges hide weaknesses you can't see. Always verify the ground before you trust it. On a public roadway, a forklift rolls forward with its forks extended into traffic, just as a fast-moving vehicle enters the same path. Never, ever move forklifts into active traffic lanes without full visibility and traffic control. Always isolate the work zone. A forklift lifts a tall stack of glass bottles, then a subtle shift at the top turns into a cascading collapse. Always stop immediately when a load begins to shift or lose stability. Don't continue lifting or adjusting a load once its balance is compromised. Tall loads raise the center of gravity, making them highly sensitive to small movements. When the forklift lifts unevenly or the load isn't perfectly secured, even a slight tilt creates a lateral force that begins to pull the stack off balance. As the top layer shifts, gravity amplifies the movement. The weight transfers unevenly through the stack, causing a chain reaction where each layer loses support. Small shifts become big failures fast. The moment a load moves, stop, reassess, reset. A vehicle rolls toward a closed barrier gate. Then the rigid arm suddenly releases and swings rapidly under stored tension. Do approach barrier gates slowly and ensure full clearance before moving forward. Don't drive into or force a gate arm that is still in the closed position. A worker opens an electrical cabinet in a confined room. Seconds later, stored energy releases in a rapid arc event that fills the space instantly. Never, ever enter or work inside energized electrical panels without proper isolation and verification. Electrical cabinets can contain high voltage energy, even when they appear inactive. A fault, like a short circuit or accidental contact, can release energy instantly as an arc flash, generating extreme heat and expanding air pressure. In enclosed spaces, this energy has limited dissipation. The result is a rapid energy release and pressure surge, turning a small fault into a full-space arc event within milliseconds. Electricity doesn't warn. You control it or it controls the system. Isolate, verify, and never assume a system is safe. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insights could save a life. Take care. In a residential courtyard, a raised work platform suddenly destabilizes mid-task. Then the entire structure collapses to the ground in seconds. Ensure all lifting platforms are positioned on level, load-bearing surfaces, properly stabilized, and continuously monitored for shifting conditions. Outriggers, locking systems, and weight limits must be verified before elevation, and no operation should proceed if ground integrity is uncertain. On a rain-soaked street beside a concrete wall, a worker climbs a metal ladder, leaning against an electrical pole. Then a sudden arc flashes, and sparks explode outward in every direction. Fully isolate electrical sources, verify de-energization, and use insulated ladders and protective equipment when working near power lines, especially in wet conditions where conductivity is significantly increased. Water reduces electrical resistance across surfaces, allowing current to travel more easily through metal structures, tools, and even the ground. When a conductive object enters the electrical field of a live line, voltage can jump across gaps by ionizing the surrounding air, creating an arc flash. This releases a concentrated burst of thermal and electrical energy, dispersing sparks and heat in all directions. Rain turns conductors into pathways. Control the current before you climb. On an upper factory level, workers guide a large piece of equipment toward the edge for loading, while one remains standing on it. Then the entire load suddenly slips and drops to the ground floor. Keep all personnel off loads being lifted or moved, and secure equipment with proper restraints before any transfer. When heavy equipment is positioned near an edge without proper anchoring, its center of gravity can shift beyond support limits. Once that tipping point is crossed, gravity takes over instantly, causing an uncontrolled speed with accelerating force. Train station platform, a long cleaning pole is raised upward, reaching into the energized zone of the overhead line above. Inside a warehouse, a loader lifts a heavy bucket of material. Then suddenly, the machine begins to tip forward as the center of gravity shifts beyond its stability limit. Inside a woodworking shop, a worker steps near a running machine when a sudden electrical arc flashes from the equipment. Inside a processing area, a worker climbs into a large compactor-like machine when the system unexpectedly reactivates and begins another cycle. Never, ever enter a machine without full lockout/tagout. Always isolate and verify all energy sources before stepping inside. Inside a construction site, lifting equipment is elevated into position. Then, in a split second, the machine tips as its stability is lost. Always wear and secure your seatbelt when operating elevated or mobile equipment. Stay anchored within the protective zone at all times. On a roadside work zone, a road roller operates with limited rear visibility. Then suddenly, the machine reverses into the blind spot area behind it. Never, ever stand in the blind spot of moving heavy equipment. Always maintain clear visibility and safe distance from operators. At a roadside work area, a worker stands beside a concrete mixer truck. Then suddenly the chute swings outward through its full radius. Never, ever stand within the swing radius of adjustable machine components. Always stay clear of chutes, arms, and attachments that can move without warning. Inside a moving work vehicle, driver alertness drops off until control of the vehicle is no longer actively maintained. Do not operate a vehicle while fatigued. Ensure at least one fully alert, responsible driver is always in control. On a roadside construction setup, a narrow scaffold is put into use when the structure suddenly loses stability and collapses under load. Do not use unsecured or incomplete scaffolding. Ensure the structure is fully assembled, braced, and stable before climbing or working at height. At a construction site, a loaded truck creates an elevated working surface, extending into the minimum clearance zone of overhead power lines. Never stand on elevated surfaces near overhead power lines. Maintain safe clearance and always assess vertical hazards before climbing. Inside a supermarket checkout area, a worker stands behind the counter when a vehicle suddenly breaches the barrier and enters the interior space. Always maintain physical barriers and safe zones between vehicle areas and pedestrian workspaces. Storefronts near traffic must be protected against vehicle intrusion. Inside a tire workshop, an inflated tire is mounted on a machine. Then, in a split second, the tire suddenly releases its built-up pressure in a rapid, outward burst. Do not stand in line with or close to an inflating tire. Use proper restraints, safety cages, and maintain distance during inflation. In a busy warehouse lane, a forklift moves forward with its forks extended. Then, in an instant, the forks enter the travel path ahead. Never stand in front of or within the travel path of forklift forks. Operators must keep forks lowered and ensure a clear path before moving. In a busy fuel station, a tanker rolls forward as a worker casually walks across its path. Two blind spot zones overlap without warning. Maintain constant awareness zones around moving vehicles and ensure drivers have clear visibility or guidance before any movement begins. Inside a tire workshop, a large wheel remains under internal pressure. Seconds later, the assembly fails, releasing a rapid outward expansion of air and mass. Handle inflated tires as stored energy systems. Use safety cages, maintain distance during inflation, and never position yourself in the direct trajectory of a pressurized wheel. At a residential compound, switching on a bore well introduces a hidden electrical hazard as the system becomes energized in a wet environment. Ensure all electrical systems near water sources are properly insulated, grounded, and checked regularly before operation, especially in wet environments. On a narrow roadside stacked with logs, the chainsaw bites into the wood, then suddenly jerks upward in a split second no one expects. Never, ever allow the upper tip of a chainsaw bar to contact wood during a cut. This is the most dangerous zone for sudden kickback. Chainsaw kickback occurs when the rotating chain at the bar's tip abruptly catches or is pinched, forcing the bar to accelerate upward in a rapid arc, redirecting the tool unpredictably along its rotational path. Respect the kickback zone. It's where control is lost instantly. Keep firm grip, proper angle, and full awareness before every cut. A quiet street corner in Brazil, one vehicle turns, another approaches, and in a split second their paths intersect without warning. At intersections, both drivers and riders must actively reduce speed, anticipate cross traffic, and maintain clear lines of sight before committing to a turn or passing through. On the shop floor, a heavy load is being adjusted, still grounded, still controlled, until its balance shifts and it tips sideways. When rigging or repositioning heavy loads on the ground, workers must control stability from all sides and stay out of the load's potential fall path. Inside a factory line, a compressed air hose is introduced near a workstation, turning a routine moment into a dangerous misuse of high-pressure force. Compressed air must only be used for its intended industrial purpose. With strict controls and supervision, misuse, even for a second, can turn invisible pressure into a severe internal hazard. Compressed air stores energy at high pressure, and when released suddenly, it expands rapidly into any available space. This rapid pressure change can force air into confined areas of equipment or materials, creating hidden internal stress and structural disruption without obvious external signs. Air under pressure is not harmless. It delivers force you cannot see. Misuse of compressed air turns everyday tools into serious hazards. In a tight street trench, excavation work continues as an excavator operates within the same cut. Then the walls suddenly give way, sending a mass of soil collapsing inward. Excavations must be properly supported, and heavy equipment should never operate within or too close to unsupported trench walls where its weight and vibration can trigger collapse. In a bakery workspace, a worker leans over a running mixer. Fabric hangs loose for just a moment, then the rotating motion suddenly pulls it inward. Rotating machinery must always be operated with secured clothing, proper guards in place, and zero body proximity to moving parts during operation. Rotating mixers create continuous torque and pulling force at contact points. Once fabric makes contact, friction and rotational energy rapidly draw the material inward, accelerating faster than the motion can be reversed. Machines follow motion and force without pause. Loose clothing near rotation turns seconds into irreversible mechanical capture. Inside a tight loading bay, a truck reverses toward a fixed conveyor line, narrowing the space into a confined pinch zone. Pinch points between moving vehicles and fixed equipment must be kept completely clear, with enforced no-go zones and controlled reversing procedures. On a roadside job, a truck-mounted lift raises a long metal pole into the clearance zone of overhead power lines, triggering a sudden electrical arc across the gap. Any equipment or load operating near overhead lines must maintain strict clearance distances with power isolation or spotter guidance before lifting begins. Electricity can arc from high voltage lines to nearby conductive objects without direct contact. Once the metal pole or lift enters that energized zone, current travels instantly through the structure and into the ground path below. Power lines don't need contact to strike, they only need proximity. If the clearance isn't controlled, the entire setup becomes energized. Inside a construction pit, workers moved among loose material when a heavy iron girder suddenly dropped into the workspace. Overhead, loads and structural elements must be secured and isolated, with workers kept completely clear of any potential drop zones. A suspended or unstable girder carries gravitational potential energy that converts instantly into force when released. Without restraint or warning, the falling mass accelerates rapidly, leaving no time to react within the impact zone. If it can fall, it must be controlled before anyone enters below. Unsecured weight above turns the ground into a hazard zone. Inside a workshop, an older car sits on a dynamometer. Then the throttle spikes beyond the system's stability limits. High-speed testing must match the vehicle's condition with proper restraints, controlled acceleration, and safe operator positioning. In an open industrial yard, an electrical cabinet stands energized with its door open when a sudden arc flash forms across the exposed components. Electrical panels must remain secured and de-energized during access, with strict lockout procedures and controlled approach distances. High-voltage equipment can release an arc flash when conductive paths form across energized components. This rapid discharge generates extreme heat, pressure, and light in a fraction of a second. An open panel can hide energized danger in plain sight. Without isolation, one step too close triggers an instant release. Inside a factory press station, the machine's operating zone is accessed. Seconds later, the press cycles automatically. Access to press zones must be strictly controlled using lockout systems, interlocks, and presence sensing safeguards before any entry is allowed. On an elevated rail platform, live electrical lines run overhead. Then a sudden arc flashes across the gap. Work near high-voltage railway systems demands strict adherence to minimum approach distances and isolation procedures. Overhead lines can energize surrounding airspace, meaning direct contact isn't required for danger. Workers must treat all lines as live unless confirmed otherwise, maintain safe clearance at all times, and use insulated tools and barriers where required. Inside a machine workshop, a magnetic lifter engages a heavy load when imbalance in contact and center of gravity causes the load to shift and tip sideways. Do not rely solely on magnetic rigging to stabilize a load during attachment or positioning without confirming balance, surface contact, and secondary support. Magnetic lifters depend entirely on clean contact and center of gravity alignment. If the load is uneven, oily, or off-center, the holding force becomes unstable. Always secure the load with backup restraints, keep hands and legs out of the drop zone, and ensure the load is properly supported before engaging or adjusting any lifting device. At a roadside tire station, a wheel is inflated under pressure. Then, in an instant, the stored energy releases in a rapid outward expansion. Never, ever stand or position any part of your body directly beside or over a tire while inflating, especially when pressure levels are unknown or the tire condition is compromised. Tires store compressed air energy, and if structural integrity fails, that energy releases instantly in all directions. Always use a clip-on air chuck with a remote line. Stand clear of the trajectory, zone, and inspect the tire and rim for damage, wear, or improper seating before applying pressure. Compressed air inside a tire stores potential energy as pressure builds against the tire walls. If the tire or rim fails, that pressure is released suddenly, rapidly expanding outward and converting stored energy into high-speed air movement and mechanical force. Air under pressure is invisible, but never harmless. Distance is your only protection when pressure fails. On a snowy construction site, a suspended roof panel is being positioned. Then it suddenly tilts and shifts out of balance. Do not position yourself beneath or directly beside a suspended load without full stabilization, secure rigging, and controlled guidance. Large panels have shifting centers of gravity, and even slight imbalance or improper anchoring can cause sudden rotation or release. Always use proper lifting points, tag lines to control swing, and ensure workers remain outside the load's fall radius while the structure is being aligned and secured. On a wet facility entrance, a heavy truck begins moving while its front blind zone hides anything directly ahead. Never ever ride or pass directly in front of a large vehicle that is about to move. Bikes are small, fast, and easily lost in blind spots. The front of a truck creates a deep blind zone where low-profile objects like bikes are completely hidden from the driver's view. With vehicle mass and forward momentum, the driver has limited ability to detect or react in time once movement begins. Blind zones remove visibility completely. Stay clear of a truck's forward path. Distance is your only protection. At a construction site, a massive panel hangs suspended when the sling exceeds its load capacity and fails, causing the load to shift and drop sideways. Do not use rigging slings without verifying their load rating, condition, and protection against sharp edges. Slings are only as strong as their weakest point, and when subjected to excessive tension, abrasion, or edge loading, they can fail instantly. Always inspect for wear, use edge protectors, ensure proper sling angles, and keep all workers well outside the load's swing and drop zone during lifting operations. On a factory floor, a tall automated machine stores energy within its system. When triggered, it suddenly activates and drives downward along its guides. Never, ever enter or position yourself within the operating range of automated machinery unless it is fully isolated, locked out, and verified as zero energy. Automated systems can activate unexpectedly due to stored energy, control faults, sensor triggers, or human error. Always apply full lockout/tagout procedures. Verify de-energization, and maintain a clear exclusion zone around moving components to eliminate exposure to sudden mechanical motion. Automated machines store energy through hydraulics, pneumatics, or electric motors, which can release instantly when triggered. When the mechanism drives downward, actuators convert stored energy into linear force, accelerating the structure along guided rails. This rapid motion generates high compressive force, leaving no reaction time once movement begins. If it can move, it will move without warning. Control the energy, or the machine controls the outcome. At a loading bay, a heavy machine is transferred from a truck onto forklift forks when the load suddenly shifts and drops off balance. Avoid positioning yourself near or under a load during transfer between surfaces such as a truck and forklift. During offloading, the load is at its most unstable state due to shifting weight, partial support, and misalignment between surfaces. Ensure the load is fully secured, evenly balanced on the forks, and properly aligned before removing support from the truck. Maintain a clear exclusion zone around the transfer path and use controlled lifting techniques rather than manual guidance near the hazard zone. Behind a line of parked cars, a vehicle suddenly begins reversing, turning the narrow space into a moving hazard zone. Never assume parked vehicles are stationary. Rear blind zones hide movement, and reversing can begin without warning. Maintain distance, avoid rear paths, and treat every vehicle as active. Inside a warehouse loading area, a forklift sits with a load positioned. Then suddenly, the machine begins creeping forward on its own. Never allow any position directly in front of a forklift unless the machine is fully secured, parked, and immobilized. Inside a busy kitchen, a large container is handled above a slick tile floor. Then a sudden loss of footing sends the load tipping as the contents pour out. Handle large liquid containers with controlled positioning and stable footing, especially in environments prone to spills. Wet or contaminated floors reduce traction and increase the risk of sudden loss of balance under load. Use proper lifting techniques, secure grip points, and keep walking paths clean and dry to maintain control while carrying heavy or unstable contents. At a loading bay, workers guide a heavy metal load using a manual pallet jack out of a truck when gravity at the edge causes the load to accelerate forward and overcome control. Control heavy loads during descent by managing speed, resistance, and positioning, especially at dock edges. Manual pallet jacks rely entirely on human control, and when moving downhill or across a height transition, loads can quickly overpower handling force. Use wheel chocks, dock levelers, or mechanical restraints, and keep all personnel positioned outside the direct path of moving loads. Inside a repair garage, a worker pulls a hose across the floor while a car sits nearby. Then a snag sets everything in motion as connected items begin to tip and collapse. Keep work areas organized and free from trailing hazards that can catch, pull, or transfer force unexpectedly. Hoses, cables, and loose connections can link multiple objects together, turning a simple movement into a chain reaction. Secure equipment, manage lines properly, and maintain clear pathways to prevent unintended force transfer across the workspace. When the hose is pulled, tension travels along its length and transfers force to any connected or obstructed objects. If that force exceeds the stability of nearby items, it initiates movement, shifting their center of gravity. Once one object falls, it can trigger additional impacts, creating a cascading effect driven by gravity and momentum. One pull can move more than you expect, control the line, or trigger the chain. Inside a workshop, workers begin rigging a suspended machine component for lifting. Then, mid-adjustment, the load suddenly swings sideways, cutting across the work zone. Stabilize loads fully before and during rigging to prevent uncontrolled movement. Suspended equipment must be balanced, properly secured, and guided with tag lines to control direction. Keep all personnel positioned outside the swing radius and ensure lifting points are correctly aligned to avoid sudden shifts during tensioning. In a narrow alley, a small cargo trike carries a heavy machine across uneven ground. Then at a pothole, the load shifts and the entire vehicle tips sideways. Navigate uneven surfaces with reduced speed, balanced loads, and controlled positioning. Heavy cargo raises the center of gravity, making small vehicles highly sensitive to dips, edges, and sudden elevation changes. Plan the path ahead, stabilize the load, and approach obstacles at angles and speeds that maintain balance and traction. As the vehicle enters the pothole, one side drops while the load's mass continues forward, shifting the center of gravity of the wheelbase. This creates a tipping moment that overcomes the vehicle's stability. Once the balance point is exceeded, gravity pulls the system sideways, leading to rollover. Uneven ground changes everything in an instant. Control the path, or the load controls the fall. Outside a garage, a worker sweeps beside a parked car. In a split second, the vehicle rolls forward, sending the tool snapping back into the work zone. Secure vehicles fully before working around or in front of them, especially in active service areas. Even slight movement can turn nearby tools into fast-moving hazards. Use wheel chocks, engage parking systems, and keep loose objects clear of tire paths to prevent unintended force transfer. Inside a kitchen prep area, heat builds along a metal counter. Then, in an instant, a sudden flare erupts across the surface, flooding the space with flame. Control ignition sources and flammable materials when working with heat-based equipment. Oils, vapors, and residues can ignite rapidly when exposed to high temperatures or open flames. Keep surfaces clean, monitor heat levels closely, and ensure proper ventilation and fire suppression measures are in place to prevent sudden flare-ups. Flammable vapors form when liquids are heated, creating a combustible mixture in the air. When this vapor reaches its ignition temperature, it can ignite instantly, causing a rapid expansion of flame across the surface. The confined space and nearby materials allow the fire to spread quickly in all directions. Heat turns small risks into instant hazards. Control the source or face the flash. At a busy loading dock, a tight clearance exists between a ramp and a delivery vehicle. When reversing motion begins, the available space compresses instantly. Stop all vehicle movement before entering or adjusting positions near loading interfaces. In tight dock spaces, even slight motion rapidly closes clearance zones. Control movement first, then correct alignment. Inside a living room, a step down from an elevated surface is misjudged. Then in a split second, footing misses and gravity takes over. Maintain controlled footing when stepping down from elevated surfaces, especially in cluttered or uneven areas. Descending requires clear landing space, stable support, and proper body positioning. Always ensure visibility of the step-down point and avoid rushed or blind footing when transitioning from height to ground level. When the foot lands incorrectly, the body's center of gravity shifts outside the base of support. Without proper contact and balance, there is no opposing force to stabilize movement. Gravity takes over immediately, resulting in a direct downward fall. The way down is where control is lost. Place the step, or balance disappears instantly. A roadside recovery scene, cranes begin lifting an overturned tanker back onto its wheels. In a sudden shift, the massive load swings past balance and rolls over to the opposite side. Control balance and lifting angles carefully during recovery operations involving large vehicles. Uneven lifting, poor synchronization, or incorrect rigging can shift the center of gravity beyond control. Plan the lift path, use coordinated crane movements, and maintain a clear exclusion zone around the rollover path during repositioning. A loaded conveyor runs continuously as loose fabric drifts too close, and the roller doesn't let go. Never, ever allow loose clothing near rotating conveyor rollers. Once fabric is captured, motion escalates instantly. The rotating roller applies constant torque and friction. When loose fabric contacts the knit point, it is gripped and continuously wrapped, converting rotation into sustained pulling force with no release once engagement B. Rotating equipment demands secured clothing and enforced clearance zones. Rollers do not distinguish materials. Any loose material is immediately drawn into the system once contact is made. Inside a busy palletizing warehouse, workers move between stacked goods while a forklift begins reversing through the aisle. Then, in a single blind moment, travel paths overlap within the machine's rear zone. Reversing equipment creates constantly shifting blind zones where operators lose direct visibility. In shared workspaces, the risk isn't just movement, it's overlapping movement. Clear separation between pedestrian zones and machine paths, along with active signaling and awareness, is essential to prevent these invisible collisions. Forklifts are designed for lifting capacity, not rapid stopping. Their weight and load increase momentum, meaning once they are in motion, they require a measurable distance to stop. Combined with limited rear visibility, objects entering the machine's path may not be detected until stopping distance is exceeded. If you're behind moving equipment, you're outside its field of view. Separation and controlled pathways are the only way to prevent blind zone hazards. Inside a metal fabrication workshop, an operator works on a powered metal processing machine. Suddenly, the machine activates unexpectedly, and the rotating mechanism surges to life. On a factory floor packed with conveyors and robotic arms, a boundary is crossed into an active movement line, yet the system continues without interruption. At a busy city intersection, road workers kneel beside an open manhole performing maintenance when a sudden burst of pressurized gas erupts from the opening and ignites. On an open roadway, two workers focus on smoothing freshly poured material while traffic continues moving just feet away. Within seconds, a moving vehicle drifts into the edge of the work zone, turning a routine task into an immediate roadside hazard. At a front counter, a large metal fan sits idle until contact reveals the entire frame carrying live electrical energy. Never, ever touch electrical equipment with exposed metal surfaces unless it has been fully inspected, properly grounded, and confirmed de-energized using appropriate testing tools. Always treat metal housings as potentially live, especially in environments where wiring, insulation, or maintenance conditions are uncertain. On a roadside shoulder, several people stand beside a pickup truck loaded with stacked timber logs when a speeding car suddenly veers toward the shoulder and crashes into the parked truck. Desist from loading cargo that extends into active traffic lanes without proper barriers, warning signals, and secure load control. High on an electric pole, mid-task on a live line. Then in an instant, the system energizes unexpectedly, sending a surge through the equipment and turning the elevated workspace into an unstable hazard. Working near energized lines exposes the body to direct current pathways, where even brief contact can override muscle control and instantly destabilize positioning at height. At a rural farm entrance, a worker begins closing the gate while a long truck is still passing through when the rear of the truck suddenly catches the gate and rips it off its hinges. Never, ever close gates or barriers while any portion of a long vehicle is still moving through the entrance. Always confirm that the full length of the vehicle is completely covered before attempting to close the gate. Inside a cramped electrical room, a worker reaches into an energized panel, and in a split second, the system reacts. Never, ever work on live electrical equipment without full isolation, lockout-tagout, and verified zero energy. On a roadside bridge approach, a crawler crane lifts a heavy load. Then the entire machine begins to tilt sideways as its base loses stability. Never, ever operate a crawler crane on uneven, sloped, or uncompacted ground while lifting a heavy load. Always ensure the ground is level, load-bearing capacity is verified, and the crane is properly positioned and stabilized before any lift begins. In a roadside workshop, a tire sits under pressure. Then, without warning, the air system suddenly releases, sending stored energy outward in an uncontrolled burst. Never, ever inflate a tire beyond its rated pressure or without proper restraint equipment. Inside a scrap processing furnace floor, a worker pushes a wheelbarrow toward an open furnace pit when he suddenly loses footing at the edge and the wheelbarrow tips toward the chamber. Maintain guarded barriers and safe working distance around open furnace pits and high-temperature chambers. It is recommended to stay at a reasonable distance from a fire furnace to avoid accidents associated with coming too close to it. Inside a deep excavation pit, an excavator works close to the trench wall. When the ground suddenly gives way, do not enter or work near an unsupported trench without proper shoring, sloping, or protective systems in place. Inside a warehouse loading area, a forklift carries a tall bundle of long materials toward a doorway. Seconds later, the load strikes the overhead structure, ruining the structure. Check vertical clearance before moving tall loads through doorways, beams, or overhead structures. Always measure the height of the load to be carried by the forklift to prevent damage or worse, injuries. A worker handles a suspended metal piece, but the moment it is guided back toward its original position, stored force takes over, and the material snaps along its return path. Never, ever place yourself in the line of rebound when handling suspended metal or any tension-loaded material, and always control its return path, because stored energy can snap back without warning. During a forklift demonstration in an industrial yard, one forklift lifts another high into the air until the pressure blew a hose, hydraulic oil sprayed out, and the lifted forklift dropped. Never lift vehicles or heavy equipment with a forklift unless specialized lifting equipment and proper rigging are used. Inside a storage room, a worker climbs onto a shelving unit to reach the top. Then the entire structure suddenly shifts, turning a stable setup into an unstable hazard. Never, ever use storage shelves as a ladder or climbing surface, and always use proper access equipment like ladders or step platforms designed for safe elevation. Inside a small workshop, a man strikes a metal assembly with a hammer, and the impact sends a loose metal piece flying out from the impact zone. Never strike metal components while another person is holding or stabilizing the part. Secure the material in a vise or fixture and keep workers out of the strike zone. Hammer impacts transfer large amounts of kinetic energy into metal parts. If the component is not fully secured, fragments or fasteners can release and travel in the direction of least resistance at high speed. Loose metal and hammer force can create dangerous projectiles. Secure the workpiece and keep people clear of the impact zone. At the rear of a dump truck, the tailgate is lifted and held open. Then suddenly, it drops without warning. Never, ever stand directly beneath or behind a raised tailgate or suspended load, and always ensure it is securely supported, locked, or mechanically restrained before working near it. On a busy roadside work zone, a dump truck is being loaded while a worker stands in front, supervising on the roadway as a bus in traffic begins to approach. Desist from ever positioning yourself in front of or within the movement path of a dump truck during loading or unloading operations. Always maintain a clear exclusion zone and ensure the vehicle is fully secured with communication established between operator and ground personnel. High above the ground, two workers stand on a narrow beam beside concrete structures. Then the platform suddenly shifts beneath them. Do ensure all elevated work platforms are fully secured, stable, and equipped with proper guardrails and fall protection before stepping onto them. Don't rely on narrow beams or incomplete structures for footing. Elevated surfaces depend on stable load distribution, but narrow or unsecured beams can shift when weight is applied unevenly. Even slight movement can disrupt balance, especially at height, where there is no margin for recovery. At height, stability is everything. Secure the platform, then step on it. On a factory machine platform, a worker attempts to open a metal floor hatch beside an operating equipment when the panel suddenly shifts and the opening gives way beneath it. Do not open machine pit covers or floor access panels while standing directly over the opening. Industrial floor hatches often conceal deep machinery pits or service chambers. Once the panel is lifted, gravity and loss of footing can quickly pull anything above the opening downward. Hidden pits create sudden fall hazards. Open access panels from the side and secure the area before exposing the opening. On a city roadside work zone, a worker places safety cones near parked vehicles while carrying out road maintenance. When a car suddenly rolls forward into the marked work area, create a protective buffer zone with physical barriers or vehicle wheel chocks when working beside parked or stopped vehicles. Inside a busy hair salon, a stylist switches on an electric hair tool when the device suddenly malfunctions and remains powered without releasing. Always ensure electrical grooming tools are properly insulated and connected to protected outlets with a quick access power switch. At the rear of a moving garbage compactor truck, two sanitation workers hurriedly step down from the riding platform. One suddenly loses footing near the wheel path as the truck continues moving. Do not step off sanitation trucks while the vehicle is still moving. Ensure the driver brings the truck to a full stop before dismounting. When a heavy truck is moving, its large mass and rotating wheels create a continuous hazard zone along the side and rear. A small loss of balance near the wheels leaves almost no time or space to recover. Moving trucks and close ground contact create a high-risk zone. Stop the vehicle completely before workers mount or dismount. Inside a workshop doorway, two men stand on a scaffold while a woman grabs the expandable X-brace beneath it, and the entire structure suddenly collapses. Do not push, pull, or handle scaffold cross-bracing while the platform is occupied. Scaffold bracing controls the frame's stability, and disturbing it can destabilize the entire structure. At a construction site, a mobile crane lifts a large concrete beam over a wall. Then the entire crane suddenly tips backward as the load pulls the boom past its balance point. Always verify load weight and lifting radius and operate strictly within the crane's load chart. On a busy shipping dock, a forklift moves a full load between trailers when the travel path suddenly becomes obstructed, turning a routine movement into a high-risk blind spot hazard. Keep pedestrians and truck drivers completely separated from active forklift lanes, and don't allow anyone to walk or stand near moving loads or blind spots on the dock. Beside a loaded truck in the dark, a group works around a raised wheel for maintenance. Then, without warning, the balance shifts and the entire vehicle tips sideways under its own weight. Heavy vehicles under maintenance rely entirely on stable support and balanced load distribution. Lifting one side without securing the center of gravity can instantly turn the entire structure into a tipping hazard. When a truck is lifted, its weight shifts toward the remaining contact points, raising the center of gravity. If that center moves beyond the base of support, gravity takes over and the vehicle rotates rapidly toward the ground. A slight imbalance can move tons in a heartbeat. Stability must be controlled before anything gets lifted. Inside a foundry floor, multiple molten metal pots sit exposed. Then, without warning, a small introduction of moisture turns stored heat into rapidly expanding energy. Never, ever introduce moisture, tools, or unstable materials into molten metal, because trapped water instantly converts to expanding steam and rapidly expels molten metal due to steam expansion. In a damp, cluttered workspace, water spreads across the floor as equipment runs. Then a single contact turns the entire area into a live hazard. Keep electrical equipment fully isolated from wet conditions. Maintain dry working surfaces and ensure proper insulation and grounding before operating any powered system. Water reduces resistance and expands the path. Electricity can travel, allowing current to spread across surfaces instead of staying contained. Once a conductive path forms, energy moves instantly through the environment. Electricity follows the easiest path, and water creates it. Control the environment, or the hazard controls everything. Deep inside a warehouse aisle, a forklift carries a pallet raised high above the operator's line of sight. Then, without warning, the load shifts and causes the forklift to tip into the gap. Operate forklifts with loads kept low, centered, and stable during travel, and only raise materials when properly positioned for placement. Maintain clear zones so no one is exposed to elevated or unstable loads. As a load is lifted, the forklift's combined center of gravity moves upward and forward, reducing stability and increasing leverage on the mast. This makes the system highly sensitive to small forces, such as uneven weight distribution, mast tilt, or sudden stops, allowing gravity to pull the load downward once balance is lost. Height magnifies every mistake in material handling. Keep it low, keep it stable, and control every movement. On a narrow metal platform above a canal, the surface becomes slick and unstable. One misstep sends a worker's foot sliding towards the exposed edge in a split second. Wet, uneven surfaces combined with open edges create a high-risk slip zone where balance can be lost instantly, especially when no secondary protection is in place. Inside a masonry workspace, a worker steadies a ladder against a tall wall. A loose block suddenly drops from the top and falls straight down from above. Keep the area below masonry work clear and ensure materials at height are properly secured before anyone works underneath. Objects positioned near the edge of elevated work areas are vulnerable to movement caused by vibration, shifting materials, or simple contact during construction tasks. Masonry blocks placed loosely on top of walls can gradually lose stability as nearby work continues. Once a block moves past its balance point, gravity pulls it downward immediately. Falling objects are one of the most common job site hazards. Secure materials above and keep workers clear below elevated work zones. On a busy city street outside a pharmacy, a mobile boom lift suddenly loses stability and tips toward the roadway. Never operate elevated work platforms on unstable ground or without properly deploying stabilizers and securing the work zone. While working on a machine, a worker reaches inside the compression section to adjust something when the heavy press mechanism suddenly begins moving. Do not place hands inside active compression equipment. Shut down and isolate the machine before performing any adjustments or clearing tasks. Compression machines are designed to apply large forces by bringing two surfaces together using mechanical, hydraulic, or pneumatic power. When a cycle starts, the moving plate or roller travels along a fixed path toward the compression zone. Any object inside that zone becomes trapped between the moving and stationary components until the motion completes. Compression machines are built for force, not forgiveness. Power down and lock out equipment before reaching inside. On a sloped blue metal roof, a homeowner shifts position while making a quick repair. Then, split second, traction is lost and gravity pulls movement rapidly toward the exposed edge. Roof work combines height, angle, and low friction surfaces, where even routine movement can quickly turn unstable. Secure access, proper positioning, and fall protection transform a risky surface into a controlled workspace. Metal roofing reduces friction, and when combined with a slope, gravity continuously pulls the body downward along the surface. Once balance is lost, acceleration increases rapidly, leaving little time to recover before reaching the edge. A small slip at height becomes a fast fall. Stability isn't optional, it's your only control. Inside a loading bay, a forklift approaches a palletized load, right where machine motion overlaps with unstable footing. Do keep clear of forklifts and unsecured pallets during movement. Don't enter the load or travel zone while force is being applied. Inside a machine area, equipment surfaces are used as support while nearby systems remain energized. Then a hidden current suddenly turns the entire structure into a live electrical hazard. When conductive surfaces have large contact areas and become energized, resistance drops and current flow increases. If grounding paths align, electricity follows the path of least resistance through connected surfaces to ground. When a person is in full body contact with conductive equipment, the contact area increases, lowering resistance and allowing more current to pass if the system becomes energized. This creates a direct pathway for electricity to flow through the body to ground. Surfaces aren't always safe just because they look inactive. Positioning matters because contact can complete the circuit. While factory workers attempt to lift a massive steel coil off a flatbed trailer, one worker climbs down to help stabilize the load. Just then, the lifting rope suddenly fails, and the coil drops. Never position yourself beneath or beside a suspended industrial load. Secure the lift properly and keep the landing zone completely clear. Near a row of industrial tanks, a narrow access edge beside a ladder turns routine movement into an exposed drop hazard above an open chemical system. Never work near open chemical tanks without proper fall protection and secure platforms. Install guardrails and maintain controlled access around hazardous openings. Industrial tanks containing chemicals such as sulfuric acid create extremely hazardous environments when left open or partially exposed. Elevated walkways, ladders, and narrow edges introduce fall risks, especially when surfaces are wet, corroded, or obstructed by cables and pipes. If a worker loses balance, gravity quickly pulls the body toward the lower level. Open tanks create invisible fall hazards. Secure edges and use proper fall protection around chemical systems. While driving a forklift down from a trailer ramp, the operator begins descending, but the tires were improperly set during descent and it shifted off the support. Do not operate forklifts on loading ramps that are overextended or unsupported. Ensure ramp plates are properly positioned and fully supported before use. On the deck of a moving chemical tanker, a sudden flash erupts. Within seconds, flames push outward from the cargo hold as pressure rapidly builds, turning the confined space into a volatile, expanding hazard. Volatile cargo under pressure can transition from stable to explosive in an instant when containment is compromised, turning confined spaces like cargo holds into rapid energy release zones. In a warehouse aisle, a worker steadies a massive moving glass panel with one hand when the glass loses balance and shatters to the ground. Do not manually stabilize or guide large moving glass panels. Use proper restraints and handling equipment. High above a building, a large glass panel is lifted by a crane. Then suddenly, mid-air, it fractures and fragments fall across the area below. Use proper rigging methods, edge protection, and fully controlled lifting procedures when handling fragile materials. Ensure loads are evenly supported and protected from any point stress that could trigger sudden failure. Glass is a brittle material with very low tolerance for tensile stress and almost no capacity to redistribute uneven forces. During lifting, improper sling placement, uneven load distribution, or sudden movement can create localized stress concentrations, small areas where force becomes highly focused. These stress points can exceed the material's strength instantly, causing a rapid fracture that propagates across the entire panel, with gravity accelerating the resulting fragmentation downward. Fragile materials fail without warning under uneven stress. Control the lift or expect sudden fragmentation. A worker sits on the upper level of a mobile scaffold, while another worker below begins pushing the frame across the concrete surface, leading to a huge fall. Never move a rolling scaffold while workers remain on the structure. Mobile scaffolds are tall and narrow, meaning their stability depends heavily on keeping the center of gravity directly above the wheelbase. When the scaffold starts moving, friction, bumps, or sudden shifts in force can push that center of mass sideways. Once it moves beyond the base support, the entire frame rotates and the scaffold rapidly collapses to the ground. Movement and height create a dangerous instability in mobile scaffolds. Always clear the platform before rolling the structure. At an aquarium exhibit, a woman moves along the upper-level walkway above a large shark tank, then suddenly loses balance near the edge as the open drop below is exposed. Do not lean over, climb, or cross protective barriers around aquarium tanks or animal enclosures. At a residential delivery site, two delivery men try to maneuver a full-size refrigerator up the front steps alone when the heavy appliance suddenly loses balance and tips forward. Never move large appliances alone on stairs or uneven entryways. Always use a second handler and proper lifting equipment. Refrigerators have a tall center of mass, making them unstable when tilted or pushed up steps. Once the center of gravity moves beyond the support point of the base, gravity and momentum cause the appliance to rotate forward uncontrollably. Heavy appliances require controlled lifting and team coordination. Always use proper equipment and assistance when moving tall, unstable loads. Inside a large indoor hall, a stepladder is used to reach an upper wall when a shift beyond the side rails causes the ladder to suddenly lose stability. Never lean beyond the ladder's side rails. Always climb down and reposition the ladder to keep your body centered. Inside a restaurant stairwell, a waitress starts carrying a large box filled with dirty dishes down a long flight of stairs when it slips from her hands and the heavy load rolls down the stairs. Do not carry bulky loads that block your view while walking downstairs. Keep one hand free for the railing and maintain clear visibility of each step. When a heavy object is carried in front of the body, the center of mass moves forward. While descending stairs, gravity increases forward momentum, making balance recovery difficult if the body moves beyond the stable support area of the feet. Large loads reduce balance and visibility on stairs. Carry smaller loads and keep one hand on the railing for stability. At a roadside construction site, a concrete mixer truck stops beside a freshly excavated trench just as the soil edge begins losing support. Never park or operate heavy vehicles too close to an open trench. Keep equipment outside the safe setback distance to prevent ground failure. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insights could save a life. Take care. While sweeping across a freshly cleaned kitchen floor, one step loses grip, and in a split second, movement accelerates across the low-friction zone in an uncontrolled slide. Cleaning activities can create temporary low-friction zones where movement becomes unpredictable, especially when the surface is still wet or coated. On a narrow stairwell, a worker balances a tray while wearing high heels. One step lands wrong. Then in a split second, balance is lost, and forward motion accelerates along the steps. Footwear that reduces surface contact and stability increases the likelihood of imbalance, especially on stairs where each step demands precise weight transfer and grip. In a compact kitchen, a worker handles a device near an active cooking surface. Then in a split second, it slips free and drops into a pan of hot oil, triggering an uncontrolled reaction. High-temperature environments demand full attention. Introducing distractions, especially handheld devices, splits focus and increases the chance of uncontrolled interactions with hot surfaces and liquids. Maintaining task focus is critical when working around heat-intensive processes. While adjusting a patio awning from a ladder, a worker steps onto a roof edge near an open section where the surface suddenly gives way beneath the position. Do not step onto roof edges or open sections without proper fall protection or stable walking surfaces. Roof edges and partially installed awning frames often leave open gaps where there is no structural support beneath the feet. When a person steps near these areas, their center of gravity can move beyond the supported surface. Without guardrails or anchoring points, gravity quickly pulls the body downward once balance is lost. Unprotected roof edges turn small movements into major fall hazards. Always secure the work area and use fall protection before stepping onto elevated surfaces. On a quiet roadside, a large metal grill unit sits slightly uneven on the ground. Then, added weight shifts the balance, and within seconds, the entire structure tips and closes inward. Entering large containers, grills, or equipment not designed for human access creates a confined and unstable hazard. Always assess stability, secure all moving parts, and use proper access methods instead of climbing inside uncontrolled structures. When a person climbs into an unanchored structure, the center of gravity shifts beyond the base of support. This imbalance causes the unit to rotate or tip, while hinged components follow gravity and close rapidly, turning the interior into a confined hazard zone. Unstable structures react the moment balance is lost. Check stability, control movement, and never enter what isn't built to hold you. Inside a busy garage, two mechanics stand casually on a floor mat. Then, as an SUV moves onto the garage floor, the mat suddenly shoots backward, turning stable footing into a moving slip hazard in an instant. Loose surfaces and vehicle paths can become moving hazards when force is applied, turning stable footing into an unexpected slip zone within seconds. On a raised platform, a crane lifts a stack of concrete blocks into the air, then the suspended load drifts toward overhead power lines. Keep people completely separated from suspended loads and energized zones at all times. Lifting operations are designed strictly for materials, not human positioning or transport. Maintain safe clearance distances from overhead electrical lines, plan lift paths in advance, and ensure workers remain on stable designated platforms away from both moving loads and electrical hazards. When a load is lifted, it becomes a moving mass with shifting balance and no fixed stability, making any attached or nearby object part of that motion. As the load approaches energized lines, electricity can arc through air if the voltage is high enough, bridging the gap without direct contact. This creates an immediate energy transfer path through conductive materials and structures. Loads move, electricity reaches, control distance, or the hazard closes the gap. On a warehouse floor near a vertical lifting system, the upper section is raised. Then, without warning, it suddenly drops. On a construction site, a mobile crane lifts a long concrete column. Then the entire truck suddenly tilts as the load pulls it off balance. On a wood processing line, loose material builds near a rotating drum chipper intake. Then the machine suddenly pulls with more force than expected. Inside a steel factory packaging zone, massive coils are moved into position. Then one roll suddenly shifts and compresses the space between them. In a confined demolition courtyard, a partially supported wall remains standing. Then hidden instability causes a sudden collapse. Treat all standing walls as unstable after structural disturbance. Establish exclusion zones and verify support before approaching. On a structural steel platform, a suspended concrete beam hangs mid-air. Then a slight shift turns it into an uncontrolled swinging load. Keep clear of the swing. Radius and area beneath suspended loads. Control movement using tag lines and maintain a safe distance at all times. On a roadside, a manhole is left open. Then a passing car drifts too close to the exposed opening. Open manholes must be secured with barriers, warning signage, and traffic control to prevent vehicles from entering hazardous zones above underground work areas. At a roadside unloading point, a truck packed with foam blocks is being handled when a small flame appears near the load and suddenly intensifies. Flammable materials require strict ignition control. If combustion starts, isolate the hazard zone and activate fire response procedures immediately. On a sloped residential street, a concrete mixer truck sits momentarily, then begins rolling on its own as gravity takes over. Secure parked vehicles with braking systems and wheel restraints, especially on inclines. Maintain distance from any vehicle once uncontrolled movement begins. On a rooftop, construction area, a freshly poured concrete slab remains unsupported. Then the surface suddenly fails under its own load. Freshly poured concrete lacks load-bearing strength. Restrict access and verify full curing and support before applying any load. At a loading bay, a suspended steel cylinder becomes unstable during adjustment, exceeding the forklift's capacity and causing sudden load failure. Lifting equipment must operate within rated capacity and stable geometry. Treat suspended loads as active hazard zones and maintain distance during handling. Beside a heavy loader, a large tire is heated and struck during servicing. Then the pressurized assembly suddenly releases stored energy without warning. Do not heat or strike pressurized tires. Use controlled deflation, proper tools, and maintain safe standoff distance during servicing. On the back of a pickup truck, stacked cartons begin to shift. Then the load suddenly slides and drops off the edge. Unsecured loads must never be handled from unstable positions. Workers must stay out of the movement path of cargo that can shift or collapse. Beside a raised truck cabin, force is applied against a rigid metal rod. Then a sudden loss of grip redirects the force forward into the fixed structure. Applying force against rigid or fixed components must be done with controlled positioning and secure footing. Loss of grip can instantly redirect force into surrounding structures. Inside a tight control booth, an access floor supports shifting weight. Then the panel suddenly cracks and gives way without warning. Access floors and panels must be fully secured and load rated. Shifting loads can expose hidden weak points and trigger sudden failure. Inside a garage workshop, vehicles and tools sit in place. Then the ground suddenly begins to shake, turning everything into shifting hazards. During seismic activity, clear the hazard zone around unstable structures, vehicles, and suspended objects. Maintain distance from any potential falling or shifting mass. Inside a workshop, a fuel tank containing residual vapors is exposed to heat, triggering sudden ignition and rapid pressure expansion. Treat fuel tanks as flammable vapor hazards. Only heat, cut, or weld after full cleaning, degassing, and verification of a safe internal atmosphere. Outside a house, a ladder is set for roof access. Then a loss of base friction causes the entire setup to shift and fail during transition. Ladders must be securely anchored and extend beyond the landing point. Transitioning from ladder to surface without proper stability creates a critical fall hazard. At a tank facility, a transfer operation continues. Then overfill leads to sudden pressure release from the storage tank. Tank filling operations must be continuously monitored with functional level controls. Overfilling creates rapid pressure buildup and uncontrolled release. Inside a workshop, a pressurized tire impacts the ground, triggering a sudden rupture from stored internal energy. Pressurized tires must be handled with extreme caution. Impact, dropping, or improper handling can trigger sudden rupture. Inside a tight workshop, a large glass panel is repositioned upright. Then a slight imbalance causes it to tip sideways and close the surrounding space instantly. Handle large upright panels with controlled support and stabilization. Keep clear of the tipping path and maintain a safe exclusion zone. Glass panels have a high center of gravity relative to their narrow base, making them inherently unstable when upright. As the panel shifts, its center of gravity moves beyond the base support, converting imbalance into rotational force. Because of the panel's size and smooth surface, there is little friction or resistance to slow the motion, causing it to fall rapidly sideways and close off escape space almost immediately. Large panels don't fall slowly, they collapse the moment balance is lost. Stay out of the tipping path because once it moves, reaction time disappears. Inside a paper processing workshop, a running roller machine pulls material continuously. Then loose fabric near the rollers is suddenly caught and drawn inward. Keep clear of exposed rotating machinery and eliminate loose materials near moving rollers. Use proper guarding and controlled feeding methods to prevent entanglement. Inside a machining workshop, an active CNC machine operates at high speed. Then an internal failure releases a metal fragment outward in an instant. High-speed machining requires full enclosure and shielding. Maintain containment integrity to control any released energy. CNC machines operate with extreme rotational speed and cutting force, storing kinetic energy in both the tool and workpiece. If a tool breaks or material fails, that energy is instantly released, ejecting fragments at high velocity capable of penetrating open space. Contained systems remain controlled until containment is lost. Maintain barriers because released energy travels instantly. Inside a metal workshop, molten material is processed. Then contact with moisture triggers a rapid energy release in an instant. Keep molten metal isolated from water and moisture. Control environmental conditions to prevent rapid steam expansion hazards. When molten metal contacts water, the liquid instantly vaporizes into steam, expanding up to 1,700 times its volume, generating extreme pressure and ejecting material outward through rapid expansion. Heat and moisture don't mix. They multiply into force. Keep systems dry because rapid expansion happens instantly. Inside an auto workshop, a vehicle is raised on a lift. Then it suddenly shifts and drops as support stability fails. Secure vehicles on lifts with verified locking and stabilization. Loss of support creates immediate compression hazard zones beneath the load. Inside an industrial line, a machine appears, stopped. Then the system suddenly cycles, again without warning. Fully isolate and lock out all energy sources before interaction. Unexpected reactivation can turn idle systems into immediate pinch point hazards. Industrial machines store energy in hydraulic, pneumatic, or electrical systems. Even when motion appears stopped, residual or automated signals can trigger a cycle, instantly converting stored energy into force that closes gaps in moving parts. A stop machine isn't a safe machine. Isolate the energy because motion can return without warning. Inside a workshop, a running machine rotates at constant speed. Then loose fabric enters the motion and is pulled in instantly. Loose materials must never be present near rotating or moving machine parts. Once fabric enters the system, the motion can draw it in immediately. In a warehouse, a tall, top-heavy board relies on temporary stabilization. Then the force is removed, shifting its center of gravity beyond the base. Never rely on a person to stabilize heavy or upright materials. Always use proper mechanical support before any work begins. A human cannot provide a consistent stabilizing force against a large, top-heavy object. Once stabilizing force is removed, even momentarily, the center of gravity shifts beyond the base. Temporary stabilization fails under load. Structures require fixed support. If balance depends on unstable forces, failure is already in motion. Inside a cluttered workshop, a rotating system with stored pressure destabilizes, triggering an instant energy release. Do not work near rotating or pressurized systems without isolating energy sources. Hidden pressure or heat can release violently at any moment. In a CNC workstation, motion pauses, but stored energy remains. Then a cued command triggers instant reactivation. Maintain full isolation and verified zero energy state before entering a machine's operating zone. Automated systems can re-engage without warning. CNC machines are governed by programmed sequences, sensor feedback, and cued commands that do not require continuous human input. Even when motion appears to have stopped, the system may still be energized, holding torque in motors and awaiting the next instruction. When a cycle resumes, whether from delayed execution, signal input, or system logic, the spindle or head can move instantly along its programmed path with controlled but powerful force, creating a confined pinch and impact zone inside the machine envelope. Stillness can be deceptive. Automation doesn't mean inactivity. If energy remains in the system, motion is only a command away. At a small outdoor worksite, a truck-mounted hydraulic boom arm sits extended over the ground. Then it suddenly swings across its arc without warning. Do not stand within the swing radius of mechanical arms or booms. Maintain a clear exclusion zone whenever equipment is energized or capable of movement. On a narrow riverside road, a fully loaded truck hugs the edge. Then the outer wheels drift too far, and the entire vehicle begins to lean toward the water. Keep heavy vehicles well within stable road boundaries. Soft shoulders and edge drop-offs cannot support concentrated loads. As the truck moves closer to the road edge, one side of the tires transitions onto weaker ground with lower load-bearing capacity. This uneven support shifts the vehicle's center of gravity outward. Once the center of gravity passes beyond the tire base, the truck loses stability and gravity pulls it into a rapid lateral tip toward the lower side. Edges are not built for weight. They fail under load. Once balance shifts, recovery becomes mechanically impossible. On an automated production line, a robotic arm cycles smoothly between stations, then motion continues through its operating zone without interruption. Maintain isolation and safeguarding around automated working envelopes. Systems operate on programmed motion, not environmental awareness. Under dim. Weighbridge lights loose material on a curved trailer surface reduces friction. Then a slight shift causes immediate loss of stability. Treat debris-covered and irregular elevated surfaces as unstable. Control surface conditions and ensure secure footing zones before any movement. The curved trailer body and loose shifting load reduce contact stability, while moisture further lowers friction. As stability is reduced, the center of mass moves beyond the narrow support zone, and gravity accelerates the downward motion. Unstable surfaces convert small shifts into rapid motion. When friction fails, gravity responds instantly. Along a roadside, a wheelbarrow rests above a lower work area. Then it shifts and drops straight down into the space below. Establish exclusion zones beneath elevated areas. Unsecured tools or materials above create immediate vertical drop hazards. The wheelbarrow becomes unstable as its center of gravity moves past its resting support, triggering a rotational fall. Gravity accelerates it downward, rapidly increasing its velocity and impact force before reaching the ground-level work zone. Hazards above move without warning. If it's not secured overhead, it's already falling. A brick wall undergoes repeated localized impact, gradually shifting internal load paths until structural balance is lost and collapse occurs. Structural balance must be controlled during demolition. Removing support in one area redistributes loads and can trigger failure in unpredictable directions. Inside a dim, dust-filled bulk storage shed, a wheel loader moves forward, entering a blind zone where visibility drops to zero in an instant. Never, ever assume being in front of moving mobile equipment makes you visible. Forward blind zones are just as dangerous as rear ones. High above the ground, a scaffold structure supports load across narrow frames. Then the balance shifts and the entire system suddenly collapses. Ensure scaffold systems are fully anchored, balanced, and properly loaded. Loss of structural balance can trigger sudden collapse without warning. As lateral forces or uneven weight distribution act on the scaffold, its center of gravity shifts outside the base of support. Without rigid anchoring, this creates a tipping moment, and gravity accelerates the structure into a rotational collapse, causing the entire frame to fall as a single system. Temporary structures demand permanent stability. When balance is lost at height, collapse follows instantly. On a fast-moving production line, a press system operates on continuous cycles. Then a timed sequence drives the upper assembly downward instantly. Keep the operating zone of automated press systems fully clear. Programmed cycles and sensor triggers will continue motion regardless of external presence. Inside a dim workshop doorway, an electrical point is exposed. Then a sudden arc flash releases energy, displacing nearby objects in an instant. Maintain isolation and safe distance from energized electrical systems. Arc faults can release extreme energy instantly when conductors are bridged. An electrical arc forms when current jumps through air between conductors, rapidly ionizing the gap and producing extreme temperatures and expanding gases. This expansion creates a pressure wave capable of displacing nearby objects within the surrounding area. Electrical energy moves faster than reaction time. Where current exists, distance and isolation define survival. Inside a busy auto workshop, a vehicle sits aligned in a narrow entry space. Then it suddenly surges forward, turning the open area into a direct collision path. Control vehicle movement in confined spaces. Unexpected acceleration and momentum can rapidly turn open areas into collision zones. Along a narrow walkway beside a building, an unsecured plank loses support, accelerating downward and turning the area below into an impact zone. Secure all materials stored or handled at height. Uncontrolled objects above create immediate vertical impact zones below. Once the plank loses support, gravity accelerates it downward, increasing its velocity over the drop distance. With no obstruction or warning, the falling mass converts potential energy into impact force at ground level within seconds. What's above carries risk below. Unsecured materials always find the fastest path down. At a construction site, an excavator hangs suspended mid-air from a crane. Then, without warning, the rigging gives way and the entire machine drops straight down. Suspended loads carry stored gravitational energy, and any failure in lifting components, slings, hooks, or connections instantly releases that energy, turning the load into an uncontrolled falling mass. Inside a cluttered industrial shop, a large furnace glows from within. Then a sudden release sends energy outward across the surrounding space. Control heat, pressure, and structural integrity in furnace. Systems instability in containment can release stored energy into surrounding areas. Combustion inside a furnace generates high-temperature gases that expand rapidly. If pressure builds beyond containment or ignites unevenly, it creates a rapid pressure wave. This sudden expansion forces hot gases and debris outward at high speed, acting like a blast front within the enclosed space. Energy contained is only safe while controlled. When containment fails, the environment becomes the impact zone. In an open yard, a forklift moves forward with a raised load, silently blocking forward visibility and creating a blind travel zone. Control visibility around mobile equipment. Obstructed sightlines create blind travel zones that convert shared paths into collision risks. A raised load shifts both the forklift's center of mass and the operator's forward visibility, creating a physical blind spot directly ahead. As the machine continues moving, its momentum carries it through this unseen zone, reducing the ability to detect and react to obstacles in time. Unseen space is still within the machine's path. In motion, blind zones become collision zones. Beside an outdoor AC unit, a narrow elevated frame supports combined load. Then, without warning, the structure fails and collapses downward. Temporary or unsupported elevated structures must be rated and secured for expected loads. Exceeding structural capacity can cause sudden collapse. At the back of the truck, a pallet jack lines up to pull a tightly stacked load of drink crates. Then, as movement begins, the entire stack suddenly collapses outward. Loads that are lifted or pulled without stable alignment and proper support can shift unpredictably, turning controlled handling into a sudden collapse. As the pallet jack engaged the load, uneven weight distribution and slight misalignment caused the center of gravity to drift beyond the base. Without secure containment, the stacked crates lost structural integrity and collapsed outward under their own weight. Moving a load changes its balance in an instant. If stability isn't controlled, gravity takes over immediately. Forklift moves between stacked materials in the yard as an SUV towing a small trailer cuts across the same path. Then both lines of motion intersect at the exact same moment. Control movement and right-of-way in shared equipment zones, intersecting paths, and limited visibility can rapidly create collision trajectories. In the tight space of a busy kitchen, moisture and grease build around a steaming cooker. Then the surface suddenly loses traction and stability disappears in an instant. Control surface conditions in high-activity areas. Moisture, steam, and grease can reduce friction and create sudden slip hazards. As steam and cooking residues settle on the floor, they create a thin film significantly reduces friction. A small shift in applied force exceeds available grip, triggering sudden sliding. Low friction turns stable surfaces into motion zones. When grip is lost, movement begins instantly. Inside a partially demolished room, a compact loader drives forward and impacts a wall. Then the machine jolts and the elevated bucket suddenly releases its load backward. Control load position and movement. When operating loaders in confined spaces, sudden deceleration can shift forces and cause elevated material to spill along the machine's rearward path. The back of a delivery truck, a side gate is used as a support surface. Then the latch releases, the gate swings open, and the support disappears instantly. Never, ever stand, step, or rely on unsecured gates, tailboards, or movable panels as a working platform. Always use designated, fixed, and properly secured access points designed to carry load safely. A truck gate is not a structural platform. It is a hinged component designed to open and close, not to support sustained load. Its stability depends entirely on the latch mechanism holding it in place. Once that latch releases or fails, the gate rotates freely around its hinge. In that moment, the supporting force drops to zero, and the load's center of mass shifts beyond the edge of support, resulting in immediate and uncontrollable instability. A surface is only stable when it's fixed and secured. If it can move, it cannot support. On a delivery yard, a forklift lifts a long bundle of PVC pipes high into the air, then sudden deceleration shifts the load, and the entire machine begins to tip. Never, ever travel with a raised load or make sudden braking movements. Keep loads low, stable, and movements controlled at all times. The elevated load raises the forklift's center of gravity, reducing stability. When the operator brakes abruptly, inertia forces the load forward, shifting the combined center of mass beyond the wheelbase, causing a tip-over moment. High above a building, a large glass panel is lifted by a crane. Then suddenly, mid-air, it fractures, and fragments fall across the area below. Use proper rigging methods, edge protection, and fully controlled lifting procedures when handling fragile materials. Ensure loads are evenly supported and protected from any point stress that could trigger sudden failure. Glass is a brittle material with very low tolerance for tensile stress and almost no capacity to redistribute uneven forces. During lifting, improper sling placement, uneven load distribution, or sudden movement can create localized stress concentrations, small areas where force becomes highly focused. These stress points can exceed the material's strength instantly, causing a rapid fracture that propagates across the entire panel, with gravity accelerating the resulting fragmentation downward. Fragile materials fail without warning under uneven stress. Control the lift or expect sudden fragmentation. On a chaotic construction site, a concrete slab fractures and loses support, triggering a rapid gravity-driven drop. Never, ever stand inside the drop zone when heavy material is being lifted, shifted, or torn loose. Concrete slabs can fracture or pivot when lifted, shifting the load path instantly. Once support fails, gravity accelerates the drop so fast that the danger zone expands before anyone can react. On an open work site, a tightly wound steel coil is cut with a torch. Then the stored tension suddenly releases, driving the entire coil outward in an instant. Do not cut into coiled, compressed, or tension-loaded materials unless all stored energy has been properly restrained, secured, and safely released using controlled procedures designed to manage that force. A coiled steel strip behaves like a highly compressed spring, storing significant elastic energy from the force applied during winding. Each layer is held in place by the tension of the surrounding material. When heat from the torch weakens a section, that balance begins to break down. As the cut progresses, the internal stresses redistribute rapidly, and once the restraint is compromised, the stored energy is released instantly, causing the coil to expand outward as each layer pushes forcefully against the next. Tension doesn't disappear, it waits for release. Control stored energy, or it will release on its own. High above the ground on a skeletal steel frame, unsecured beams shift under load, then the section suddenly drops away without warning. Do not treat unsecured beams or incomplete structures as stable walkways. Only fully fixed, load-bearing surfaces provide reliable support. Inside a warehouse aisle, a cylindrical drum rolls across a smooth surface. When increasing momentum causes the load to shift and become difficult to control. Handle large cylindrical loads with controlled technique, proper tools, and clear positioning. Drums can quickly gain momentum once in motion, especially on smooth surfaces, making them difficult to stop or redirect manually. Use drum handling equipment, maintain side positioning instead of standing in the path, and ensure the travel path is clear and stable before movement. At a loading dock in Spain, an electric pallet jack is guided toward a truck trailer when instability at the transition causes the load to tip forward and drop. Manage dock-to-truck transitions with full alignment, stability, and load awareness before moving powered equipment. Gaps, uneven heights, or unsecured dock plates can instantly destabilize heavy machines during entry or exit. Always verify that the trailer is properly docked, the bridge plate is locked in position, and the path is level before committing to movement. Maintain controlled speed and positioning to prevent sudden weight shifts at critical edges. As the pallet jack crosses the dock edge, its center of gravity shifts forward onto a narrow support zone. If the supporting surface is misaligned or unstable, the weight distribution exceeds the base of support, creating a tipping moment. Once this balance point is lost, gravity pulls the mass downward, causing a rapid forward drop. Edges. Don't forgive misalignment. Control the transition, or the load takes over. Outside a small workshop, a man uses a power grinder on a metal drum. One spark lands inside a drum and the vapor inside ignites instantly. Grinding, cutting, or welding should never be performed on drums or containers that may contain flammable vapors unless they have been fully emptied, cleaned, and verified safe. Power grinders produce a continuous stream of high-temperature sparks made of tiny fragments of heated metal. Metal drums, especially those previously used for fuels, solvents, oils, or chemicals, can contain invisible vapor residues even when they appear empty. Inside a closed or partially sealed drum, these vapors mix with air and form a highly flammable atmosphere. When a spark enters the drum opening, it can ignite that vapor mixture, instantly resulting in a burst of fire that can surprise anyone standing nearby. Hot work and flammable vapors are a dangerous combination. Always isolate grinding operations from containers that could hold combustible residues. Inside a repair bay, a vehicle is raised overhead for inspection. Everything appears secure until, in a split second, the support fails and the entire load drops downward without warning. Elevated loads depend entirely on the integrity of lifting systems. Hydraulic pressure, mechanical locks, and proper positioning must all work together, because once any part fails, there is nothing left to hold the weight. Redundant safety measures and proper engagement of locking mechanisms are essential before working underneath. Vehicle lifts use hydraulic systems to raise weight, but rely on mechanical locks to hold it in place. If those locks are not engaged, or if pressure is lost, the system no longer resists gravity. The vehicle then accelerates downward immediately, with no gradual warning phase. The lift raises the load, but the lock keeps it there. Always trust verified support, not assumption. In a warehouse lane, a forklift carries a towering stack overhead. Then, without warning, the load shifts and begins to cascade downward as gravity takes over. Elevated loads introduce invisible danger zones that extend far beyond the forklift itself. When materials are stacked high or unevenly, even a slight disturbance, movement, vibration, or tilt can destabilize the entire load. Without proper securing and exclusion zones, anyone passing nearby becomes exposed to a falling hazard that gives no time to react. As a load is lifted, its center of gravity rises and becomes more sensitive to imbalance. If the stack is uneven or loosely secured, small shifts reduce friction between layers, allowing them to slide. Once movement begins, gravity accelerates the falling materials, and the collapse often spreads outward as pieces knock into each other, creating a cascading effect. Overhead loads don't just stay above, they can come down fast and wide. Distance isn't optional, it's your only protection from what gravity releases. Inside a cosmetics plant, a worker wipes down a plastic container. Friction builds silently, and in a split second, a static discharge triggers an invisible chain reaction. Never ever wipe, rub, or handle ungrounded. Plastic containers in environments where flammable vapors, liquids, or residues may be present. Always ensure proper bonding and grounding so that any generated charge is safely dissipated before it can accumulate. Plastic is an electrical insulator, which means it does not allow charge to flow freely across its surface or into the ground. As materials move against it through wiping, pouring, or handling, electrons transfer and begin to accumulate, creating a growing static charge. Without a grounding path, this charge continues to build until the electrical potential becomes strong enough to overcome air resistance, resulting in a sudden electrostatic discharge into the nearest conductive object or surface. Static builds silently. Release happens instantly. If it's not grounded, it's already a risk. In a busy industrial yard, a forklift moves steadily through an open path. Yet just beyond its frame, entire blind zones overlap and visibility disappears in an instant. Blind. Zones around moving equipment must be actively controlled at all times. Maintain strict physical separation, enforce clear communication signals, and ensure full visibility management so that no movement occurs without awareness. Forklifts are inherently limited by their design, with mass structures, overhead guards, and carried loads creating significant front and rear blind spots. As the machine moves or turns, these blind zones shift dynamically, expanding into surrounding space. When visibility is compromised, movement paths can intersect without detection, allowing two independent motions to unknowingly occupy the same space. If it's not visible, it's not controlled. Blind zones don't reduce risk, they hide it until it's too late. Don't forget to share what you learned today in the comments. Your insight could save a life. Take care